Okay, the art of conflict. Rising above the resentment trap. And I think this is really what I want to talk about today, is how to get beyond that. And a lot of times we can put on a loving face and a loving act, but we will carry the resentment for some time, and that's really the most destructive element to our peace, and that's what we want to be aware of. We can carry resentments for years, and it's very easy to do, but it's not real productive, we know. I think I've shared with you a story of a class I had one time many years ago where I was talking about Unity's view of hell and how we don't embrace it as a place of punishment that people go who were sinful, and when they die they go to hell and stay there forever. And this woman piped up. She was very angry because she had a husband that needed to go there, an ex-husband that needed to go there, and she just thought that was not right to get rid of hell. We know we need to keep it at least as long as he's around. When we think about that, it's I've had many funeral services in my career, and I don't think I have ever had one where anyone in the audience thought the person that died was going to hell. And there were some pretty shady characters that I have performed services for. But we are willing to let them go and, not carry that on, and that's a good thing. But what I had to think about with this woman was she was creating a hell for herself, apparently. And I totally understand, and the guy probably deserved it, whatever it was. But who was really suffering? She was wishing hell for him, but she was kind of creating her own by doing that. And you could just tell by the anger that came up. How dare you say there's no hell? That's where he's going. And if we get rid of that narrative, I don't have anything to hang on to. No justification. So we're going to talk about that kind of thing today, and we're going to talk about the importance of kind of watching our own rising above the resentment trap. But this question came from one of our viewers, one of our YouTube viewers. He says, you brought up personal conflict with others. Do you have a solution to offer that accommodates distance and difference? Which we all have. We have people that we don't really want to hang around because we, for whatever reason. And do we have to throw our arms around all of them? Do we have to love them all? And one of the reasons we try to do this so much is because somebody asked a lawyer, actually a spiritual lawyer, a lawyer of spiritual law, asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was, and they were trying to trip him up, which tells us Jesus was always involved in conflict. If you just look at the stories, all four Gospels talk about this. From the day he was born, according to some of the traditions, someone was trying to kill him, King Herod. And as he went through his life, we don't know what happened to him from 12 on, but when he began his ministry, it just seemed like there was a plot against him immediately. And so he was involved in conflict the whole time. And that's a thing that we need to look at, I think, is, we try to follow certain mandates, and we need to look at why we're doing this and look at how we're trying to do it and why. But he said the greatest commandment is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second like unto it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I've said before that we probably do love our neighbor about as much as we love ourselves. That you really can't love beyond how you see yourself. When you are feeling at your best, when you are feeling most loving toward yourself, it's easier to love other people. When you're not feeling so good about yourself, it's easy to turn that toward people that appear to not deserve your love. But he sets a standard here that we're all trying to live up to. This loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind. We can get by with that. That doesn't seem to be such a difficult thing because nobody has to know how much we love the Lord or not. But this loving our neighbor as ourselves, we're saying that we must love our neighbor, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And if I'm not so loving toward my neighbor, I feel like I have fallen. And so the thing I would ask is, so you have fallen, what's going to happen to you? What if you don't love your neighbor? What if you don't feel so loving toward your neighbor? What's going to happen to you? That's what we have to look at. What is our motivation for love? Are we trying to love because Jesus said we should? Are we trying to love because if we don't, we may go to hell? Are we trying to love because if we're not so loving, we're going to have to live another life, come back and do it again and again until we finally love everybody? To me, when I look at Jesus' life, and we don't have a real good picture of his life, we have pictures according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but really nothing from a historian. These people are evangelists, and they're giving a picture of him that they want to portray to their followers. So we don't really know, but if we just go on this information we have, I can cite several instances, and I have, where Jesus doesn't really appear to be all that loving toward the people he's talking to. Before he turns the tables over in the temple, he first made a whip of cords and started beating the crap out of everybody around him. And that just doesn't seem so loving. Do you think he was saying, I love you, and whipping them? I don't think so. And some of the later versions changed that because they didn't think it sounded too loving either, I guess. If you look at his life and you compare it to how you feel about the people that insult you, the people that work against you, he comes back on people all the time. He doesn't just lay down and let them wipe him all over the place. He doesn't resist them a lot of times, but he actually does, because the Pharisees will often try to trip him up. And he turns the tables on them, trips them up, which messes them up. He kind of gets back at them. If you just look at some of these kinds of things, this is what you and I do. This is where we are, and this is what we're trying to overcome because Jesus told us to love our neighbor. So think about this. What's going to happen to you if you don't feel so loving towards somebody? Are you going to be punished? I think a lot of this is a carryover from our old traditional Christian beliefs. That we've got to walk the straight and narrow. We've got to live like Jesus, be like Jesus, follow Jesus' footsteps. In unity, we call him our way shower. I don't even like that. If I look at somebody else's life and try to live according to that, I'll never live my own. I appreciate any teacher, anyone that throws out ideas that will help me live a better life. But when somebody says to love my neighbor as myself, I don't expect him to run into a temple and turn tables over and whip everybody. I would see that and I'd say, well, I thought you said we're supposed to be loving to our enemies. And he would probably say, well, yeah, but these guys are crooks. I'm totally justified. These guys are politicians. We all can hate them and be okay. So what are we afraid of if we don't love our neighbor, if we don't do it properly? This is a question that we all need to ask ourselves. What's going to happen to us if we're not loving? Well, I know what happens to me. It has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with me. I like this cartoon. There's Linus, I love mankind, it's people I can't stand. We can say, yes, I love my neighbor, and we talk about it in a generic kind of way. But that person, that specific person, or that in-law, that one that always gets under my skin, they know just the right button to push. I wish they were walking their dog and an asteroid would fall right on top of them. Wouldn't be me doing it, of course. They just deserve what they got. Who doesn't have thoughts like this? Anybody here doesn't have thoughts like that once in a while? I'm surely not the only one. I had 3 this morning. No. People are pretty hard to get along with sometimes. They're hard to love. When we think of it in terms of we have to feel really good about them, or we're going to somehow pay the price for that. So let's remember what that price is. The price is how we feel. It's what it does to us. Again, the person you may be angry at, as I have said many times, could be 1,000 miles away. But you suffer just like they're right next to you as you think about them. Have you ever had that experience? You don't have to raise your hand. We all have had that experience, I know. You can sit here and be angry at Washington, D.C. very easily. So where does the suffering occur? Where is the penalty? How am I being punished for my lack of love? If you are loving because you're supposed to be loving, you're not loving. If you're doing it because somebody else told you to, you're not doing it. You may be going through the motions. You may look very loving, but you may be wishing for the asteroid. You may be wishing for things to happen to a person, or you may just have the attitude that karma will get them. You know, we like that. That's a good way. I don't have to do it. Karma will get them. But it's the same thing. I'm wishing something on that person, wishing bad for them somehow, but doing it as, did you ever watch the series Kung Fu? He was talking about some nasty priest. He said he's like a praying mantis. He looks like he's praying just before he strikes. Being in the business of religion for around 40 years, I have seen plenty of those. So in the context that we're thinking of love, love is to love the Lord your God is to embrace the truth that love is drawing to you that which is for your highest good and dissolving that which is not. If you think of this process as occurring in you right now, love is drawing to you that which is for your highest good and dissolving that which is not. To love your neighbor as yourself is to acknowledge this same truth for others. Now, what I find is it is easier to think of another person from that perspective, if a person that I'm at odds with. Instead of me thinking bad things about them, to get to the point where I can say, you are drawing to you now the highest good for you. I don't know what that is, but you're drawing that to you, and that which is not for your highest good is being dissolved. It's easier to hold a person in that light than it is to try to pretend like you really love them in the sense that we normally think of that. It makes it easier to move into that state of mind, actually. To know that it's not my problem, whatever happens to them, whatever unfolds for them. If this woman that was angry at her ex-husband could have said that she could think about him and say, whatever is for your highest good is being drawn to you right now, and that which is not is being dissolved. It would be easier for her, I think, to place him in that type of environment than to try to get her whole being to turn around and stop being angry at him. Because in a sense, we are then turning that person over to love, the action of love. Maybe the highest good for him would be to go to hell, be punished in some way, somehow have everything thrown back in his face. Who knows? But when we're the ones that start determining that, here's what they need, God, it doesn't work so well for us. So if you let love make those decisions, if you release in that way, it's like it takes that responsibility off you. And I'm not saying that if you're angry at somebody that you're going to just be able to do that real quick. But it's something to work toward. To love your neighbor as yourself is to wish the same for them that you're wishing for yourself. That is, I want that which is for my highest good to be drawn. And you know what? It could have been that person. That person could be the highest, the thing that was the highest for your highest good. That maybe they pushed some buttons that you needed to see. So you got to think about that too. When we're saying that which is for my highest good is now being drawn to me, it doesn't mean it's all going to be roses. A friend of mine said, and I have said this before, that when you pray for prosperity, you may get a prosperity challenge. It may be a situation that pushes you to understand what prosperity at a spiritual level really means. I thought I just needed more money. But maybe I need more understanding. That story is told of Myrtle Fillmore when Unity was going through its early days and struggling, and one of the employees at Unity Village said that we needed to pray for more money. What did Myrtle say? We don't need to pray for more money. We need to pray for more love, I think. What'd she say? You don't remember? Well, I don't know why I brought that up, but just blew that one totally, so I'm going to have to edit it. No. We don't want to pray for more money. We want to pray for more faith. Okay, that makes sense. Get us all off the hook. So we interpret what we need in one way, and love may interpret it in a totally different way. So we have to be prepared for that. And it could be, too, the thing that needs to be dissolved is something we're clinging for dear life to. Because we think that's our power. We think that's our source. If I lose this, I'll be nothing. And it may be that if we lose it, we find there's more to us than we thought. That we're putting our identity in the thing that we fear that we're going to lose. When Job said, the thing I fear most has come upon me, I've said that it has to. If you want to remove that block, the thing that we fear most must come upon us so we can deal with it. So when love draws to us that which is for our highest good, it's not always fun. When it dissolves that which is not, it's not always fun. But there must be an inflow, there must be an outgoing, a taking on and a letting go. So we have a pragmatic Jesus. Jesus was in perpetual conflict with the religious professionals of his day. The lawyers of spiritual law tried to destroy his credibility. They were always after him, according to the stories. Always trying to discredit him. And why would that be? Because they were protecting their careers. They were protecting their jobs. They were protecting their own credibility, and one of the ways you protect your credibility is to destroy the one that's threatening yours. That's a known way to do things, and again, politics is all about that. It's not necessarily about my merits, it's about showing how meritless you are. So Jesus was always faced with this. He was teaching, I think, a very simple truth. The kingdom of God is within you. They were saying that's not true. The kingdom of God, you have to come through this toll gate called religion. And we're going to charge you, and we're going to tell you how to think. We're going to tell you how to conduct your life. We've got 600 and some rules a day you've got to follow to be considered a good Jew. And Jesus broke several of those just to demonstrate what are the consequences of breaking these rules. There are none. It's all foolishness. These people are controlling you. Some of just what he did would have been so offensive to the religious professionals of his day. You've got to think, if he loved them, wouldn't he not try to accommodate them? Would he try to embarrass them? Would he try to demonstrate that what they were teaching was a lie? So his actions bore this out as well. He was very pragmatic in his teachings, and I don't like to think of him as this person who never had an angry thought or never had a reaction to someone that was trying to discredit him or trying to discredit. I think that's what would have angered him when he went into the temple and saw all this commerce taking place. This is not what this religious life is about. It's not about just making money. There's a very powerful spiritual message here, and you're missing it. I can understand his anger for that. Jesus had enemies that he held accountable for using their scriptural skills and professional position to keep people in spiritual darkness. He was talking to Pharisees, I believe, when he talked about getting the log out of your eye so you could get the speck out of your neighbor's. Wouldn't you consider that kind of offensive if somebody said that to you? You hypocrite. Why don't you get the log out of your eye and then worry about what you're criticizing your neighbor for? I think most of us would have a reaction to that of some kind. But he held people accountable. And another aspect of this too is that we have this idea that Jesus came to change the world, to heal all the sick and to feed all the poor and all that. And if we're not doing that kind of thing, we're not living up to the standards. And I have to ask the question that, he went to by the pool of Bethesda, where the Gospel of John says there was a multitude of people who were sick. And Jesus only dealt with one. He only singled out one. If he was this great humanitarian, why didn't he heal them all? Why didn't he start a fund or get the government to provide help for these folks? There's no indication he did any of that. So we put stuff on ourselves that we assume he would do, which he didn't do. He looked at one person out of the multitude and said, "Do you want to be healed?" And the person started making excuses, and he held him accountable. Just take up your bed and walk. Just do it. He did hold people accountable. And when the Pharisees would be talking about something, they would ask him, always trying to trip him up, and he would come back not with something like, "Oh, you guys are the professionals, so you would know better." He was not considered a professional at all. Who is this man? Where did he get this great learning, having never studied? That was what they asked. He was an intuitive. And he saw that all of the rules that people were trying to put on, or the religious industry was trying to put on people, had nothing to do with the inner awakening. But we do the same thing. We take Jesus himself and we make all these rules and we try to put them on ourselves, and if I'm not living up to that, I'm not walking the straight and narrow. So I don't feel so loving about my neighbor today. Well, I'm not really following Jesus. I'm not really living up to that standard. And so what do? We criticize ourselves. We hold ourselves in contempt for not being able to do that. What are the consequences of doing that? Do we get hit with lightning? It's how we feel. What is holding us in bondage? Is it our action of being unloving, or is it our action of self-condemnation because we're not feeling so loving? And I would say that's the most important one right there. If I'm going through my life feeling like I just don't measure up. Spiritually, I just don't measure up. That's a pretty big burden to carry. It's also an excuse. Since I don't measure up, I can act out. I can do this and that to my neighbor. So when we look at Jesus, I think we need to look at him as a human being who had an awakening. And he was trying to explain that awakening to the people around him, and it was so weird to them because they were used to hearing that we have to do all these things to get through the pearly gates. But he was saying, if you look at yourself in a different way, if you begin to see that the kingdom is within, that the source of love and life and power, intelligence is within you. It's not within the religious organization, not within the synagogue, not within the church. It's within you. You can have a first-hand relationship with God. That message is devastating to the priesthood. They want that toll gate. You've got to go through it. You've got to pay your fine. You've got to pay your dues. That's what keeps the organization going. And so it's all about keeping the organization going and adding so many rules that I don't feel adequate enough myself to remember them, let alone follow all of them. I need a professional. I need to hire somebody. I need somebody to help me figure out how to navigate. And Jesus basically was saying, no, you don't have to do that. So he was a threat to the religious industry. And if he came back today, he'd do the same thing, I think. He'd be a threat to Christianity. He'd be a threat to the traditional Christian. I think he'd be a threat to New Thought Christianity. I think he'd be a threat to all of us. I think he had a very simple message. The kingdom is within you. God, your source, it only makes sense, is in you. Where else could it be? So that message is offensive. It's offensive today. On occasion, it's been a long time, but when I was on the radio years ago, I used to get a lot of letters from all the fundamentalists in the area, sure that I was going to hell and I was misleading people because of this kind of message. I think I told you about once a year, some people from a college, it was in Springfield, would come and interview me because I was the cult leader for some class they were taking on cults or something in religious class. There was a Vietnamese mother and son that came in, and I think if I would have jumped real fast, they would have gone through the ceiling because they were ready to flee for their lives at any moment, terrified. You could just see it in their face that I was going to cast a spell on them. Can you imagine me casting a spell on somebody? I know you're all spellbound right now, but that's a little different. How many of you fear for your lives today? I don't think too many of you do. All right. You do not have to like a person to love them. We've said that. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? To wish somebody for them that their highest good is being drawn to them, and that which is not for their highest good is being dissolved. You don't have to like that person. You don't have to get along with them to hold them in that thought. If you hold resentment toward another, then that resentment binds you, and we know that. And it's one of the most difficult things to deal with because it looks like it's all coming from them. They deserve my resentment. The question always is, do I deserve it? So the answer is to release them in love. As you think of this person, you see love drawing to them that which is for their highest good and dissolving that which is not. It's not your job to determine what needs to happen to them. And that's probably the hardest part of this. I would like to be the one that determines what is for their highest good, because I know exactly what they did to me, so I know what needs to be done to them. So God, here's your job. Here's what you need to do. So that's the human side of us, and that's fine. But who's going to be punished for that kind of hanging on? Certainly not going to be them. Knowing that love is doing its perfect work offers a way out from beneath the stifling burden of resentment. So that's a way to deal with conflict with somebody, and a way to resolve it in yourself. It's a path, and it's only one, so it's one that I'm offering today. All right. Thanks for coming out. See you next week.